Hi, I'm Mitu Kandeka-Kokoris. I'm a faculty member here at the NYU Game Center. And today I have the pleasure of introducing to you a brilliant speaker who's honestly one of the smartest, most brilliant people I know. She's a recreational mathematician, and on first glance, that seems like it's not enough of a description because she is so multi-talented and her work spans so many disciplines. But actually, if we think about her ethos and approach to math and art and music and everything, it's a description which makes a lot of sense. So you may have seen her on YouTube, where she has over 1 million subscribers, watching her mathematical or mathemusical doodles, as well as her excellent edible math, which I'm a particular fan of. She has such an incredible, unique sense of the threads between math and art, and she is so good at communicating that to people and bringing people into the fold of those things. I've had the pleasure of seeing her speak or sing several times. Some of you may remember her procedural rhetoric song at GDC last year. And speaking of singing, I was lucky enough to get to know her a little better and collaborate with her when we both went to a computational modeling workshop, and we decided to make computational karaoke together. And we also did another project together there where we were looking at intersectional feminist PCG. She co-founded Ella VR, which is a research group which uses AR and VR as tools for better understanding ourselves and the world. So not only is she an incredible creator, she's also an excellent human being who also uses her platform for good. Her brilliant playable post, Parable of the Polygons, which you might be familiar with, brings to life many of the real tensions that we may have been thinking about recently, especially. And her doodling videos have also come to address really timely social issues. So it's with great pleasure that I want to welcome to the stage Vi Hart, everyone.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Yeah, this is me and my team. We're doing VR these days, which some of you may not know. I'm part of the human advancement research community, doing research on stuff. And this is a part where, do I have slides? Yeah, I do. Okay, so just to get a sense of the context and audience I'm talking to, I'd like to ask, so who knows about my VR stuff and research and games and things? A few people. All right. Who knows about Parable of the Polygons? Many people. That's awesome. How about the YouTube stuff? Cool. Wow. More people for Parable of the Polygons. I guess that should make sense given this crowd, but it's not my usual audience. This is exciting. Many people don't know, before all of those different lives, I was doing research and being more of an academic. Here I am being very academic, working with some co-authors at MIT, writing like a real paper on computational balloon twisting. And so I've been doing recreational mathematics and math-related mathematical games for a long time, and I'm starting to put those threads together. So this is a talk that I'm not going to give, and I don't need to give. You can imagine a general audience talk about like how games change how we see the world. It's a great TED talk that you can imagine in your head in like 5 seconds. So do that quickly as context. Okay, here's the next talk. Now you can imagine in your head in like maybe 10 seconds, like a GDC talk, you know, how to manipulate player attention with, you know, you want them to notice something, and so maybe you put particles on it, and what if they're not like doing the thing you want them to do? You could like even point a great big arrow at it. All of these things, so just imagine all those things. That's a part of the context, but you don't need that talk. Then there's a talk about designing noticing, and this one is about how do you get someone to actually pay attention? Not pay attention in a form they know to something like an arrow. Everyone knows how to pay attention to arrows that point at a thing, rather than pay attention to the thing. How do you get... there's this term Kate Compton came up with, first-person noticers. And I love this term. Games like Proteus, Gone Home, The Witness, lots of things in VR, especially before good hand controls, have focused on like noticing mechanics and just what are you looking at. and trying to like think about your attention and where you are, because that's all you have, especially before we get better interaction models. You know, these kind of games really think about noticing as the mechanic rather than just trying to add it on to whatever, or like, well, you can notice whatever you want if you want to. That's life. And this is also the talk I'm not going to give, although I would like to see it, but I'm not very qualified for that. So the talk I actually want to talk about is how designing games changes us as game designers. And this is something I've started to think about a lot lately since I've been in so many kinds of game design. So now that I work in virtual reality, I'm going to unsee the fact that I need to have slides. Working in virtual reality after all the other things, and now in the context of thinking about virtual reality as the next part of computation, and computers are new and VR is new, but it's so visible because it's so new. People can't unsee the headset. You can't design a VR game right now. You can't design anything beautiful or subtle that you want to ever show anyone and have them like or give a demo on, because if in 5 seconds, all they can see is the headset. All they can see is VR, and many of them haven't experienced it. Like, it's very frustrating for game designers. There's so much wonderful things we could do, but you can't do it until the technology starts to become more invisible. And I think computer games also still have this problem, where so much of the technology is still visible. On the timeline that we think of at my research group, computers are brand new, like humanity has barely started interacting with them. We see them so much, and they're, like, stuff like this is starting to become invisible. We take them for granted, but we can't unsee it, and so our game design choices often have to think about too much, not the subtle, beautiful things we want to think about, but the parts of the technology that are still too visible to players. But it'll get there. And I started doing this in my talks too recently, is to look at like this PowerPoint thing I've realized isn't really for the audience. It's for me, so I can like stay on track. And the technology was visible and cool at first because it was shiny and I can show pictures. And now everyone uses it all the time, and I started to really think about, when do I actually need to show you a picture of a thing, and when is these notes just for me to augment my thinking? And so I'm still going to use the augmentation here, but it doesn't need to be there at this moment. So that's what I'm doing. So I have worked, now I'm working in VR. I've done a bunch of VR game stuff. I've done stuff like Parable of Polygons, I've done mathematical game design, and I've also done doodling game design. And the doodling videos are both showing the game and also a different piece of art in and of themselves. But I've started to connect that these things are all game design, and I have these similarities in how I think about game design that isn't just about computer game design or pen and paper game design or any of the other stuff. It's the platonic part of game design that is in my head that I do across all of them. And I've only just started to think about this and be able to see it because I have enough context in enough fields to kind of extract out the parts that matter to me. So I want to talk about noticing stuff and how designing games make me notice things, especially as an artist. And artists also get in the habit of noticing things. So I'm going to have this model. My first draft of the talk had lots of like diagrams with arrows, but I realized that my diagrams are so simple I don't actually need to put them up here. You can just visualize them, and then that's better because that's how we'll get it into your brain, and then it doesn't need to be here to get into your brain. So I think of like we have the game world in this bubble, and then there's like real life in this bubble. And working on games, playing games, and many other things in life, like make this noticing arrow that goes from the game world to real life. Like you play enough Tetris, and then you notice in real life when you're packing your car. Or a lot of people have this common experience where they played a lot of side-scrolling games, and then they're driving in the car, like as a child, your parents are driving, you're looking out the window, and you're imagining like a little person running and jumping, and like you're seeing a side-scroller happen in real life next to you. You know, this is kind of a weak arrow of noticing. Sometimes people notice it, sometimes it's not unless someone points it out. And you can design a game that reinforces this arrow of noticing, but when you design a game and are thinking about it all the time and are trying to find stuff to bring back to your game, you get this big noticing arrow that players of the game don't necessarily get. There is one game that I think did an amazing job of really looking at that arrow and trying to make it exist to the real world. That's The Witness. If you have played The Witness, like, look up right now at the ceiling. You know what I'm talking about, right? and the beautiful thing about that is that it doesn't just have this thing that can have a pattern that you can notice in the real world. It teaches you this arrow of actually doing the noticing in the real world by kind of having this practice run in a virtual world, which was pretty brilliant. And so that's our arrow of noticing. And this is why so often we can learn things and know things, and if we don't reinforce how to notice it in the real world, we won't. We can know all the theory and never see it. We can know it's in the real world and just never see it unless we learn this part and not just what is the theory, what is the game, what is the model. And then there's, to complete the feedback loop, or the possible feedback loop, can you bring it back? And if you have ever been working so hard on a game and you're seeing all this stuff in the real world, and then who has said this to yourself, I should put this in my game? Yeah, so some of you. And the longer you look at the game, I know some people, like, if you're walking down the street with Mark ten Bosch, you can't go a block without him, like, stopping and taking out his phone. It's like, why are you taking a picture of that bush? It looks like a totally nondescript bush. And he's like, I need to put this in my game. And he's taking a photo so he can put it in his game. And then you're looking at this bush, and suddenly you're noticing this thing in a way you haven't before. Now it's not just some random bush. It is like, it's this bush, right? It's great. It's a thing. It's got identity. It's been noticed. And I find those experiences very powerful for me as a game person, but also as a mathematician, and also in everything I do in my life. And as an artist, too. There's this great book, Soluit. Who knows who Soluit is? That's good. I was at a conference and Ken Perlin asked the same question to the audience, and I was the only one who raised my hands, and it made me very sad. Okay, so we're doing pretty good here. But an artist, and he does a lot of work with grids and conceptual art, with drawing on walls, and he has this book that he was just collecting photos of grids, because his art has lots of grids, and he's doing grids, and then he's noticing grids in the real world, and he has just photograph over photograph of, oh, here's a grate, looks like a grid. Here's a window with bars across it, it's a grid. And all these same kinds of grids, and there's this just wonderful collection of photos that speaks to this whole world where suddenly you see things differently and notice things differently, and then are bringing it back into your art, and then kind of infecting other people in it. But that, to me, it wasn't just that he does his art world inspired by the real world, but now he's teaching you how to notice through his example. And mathematics does this too. Because in mathematics, and here's a difference between what's real in a game, maybe, but what's just purely the world you're creating and its own self-consistency. Like for the Witness example, this pattern is not like a fundamental truth about the universe. It's, you know, a self-consistent world in this little pattern world that you learn to see. But other kinds of puzzles, maybe like the first kind of puzzle in The Witness, and many more hardcore puzzle games, the patterns you're learning to see actually are real in the sense that they're real mathematics. And when you see them in the world, they're real there too. And they do apply, unlike this on the ceiling. This is something mathematicians do all the time, is you start to see these things in the real world. Martin Gardner, who wrote the mathematical games column for Scientific American, was really good at, you know, explaining these mathematical games, but also explaining them in a way that made you understand how you bring them back around. So the game of life and cellular automata, you know, you can just understand the system and play the game. But once you start noticing how to do it in the real world and everything's doing it, that provides a lot of inspiration of how you can bring it back and make a better game or use it to inspire your game. Of course, this doesn't always work out so well. For example, plant spirals, phyllotaxis. There's these spirals in plants that have a particular form, and you can count them and get Fibonacci numbers, and this is a really cool math thing. So, you know, I can make a video explaining this, and then people will start sending me all pictures of plants they've seen, and Fibonacci plants, and I saw this pattern. And, all right, they're seeing a real pattern. But then the question is, now how do we learn to bring it back to our theory of how the world works? In an accurate way, because it turns out not every spirally thing can come back and be added to the theory of the universe. And where I've really seen the spiral out of control is with golden ratio myths, because there's like this cult of the golden ratio. I mean, the golden ratio is a real thing. It's got many nice mathematical properties, and Fibonacci numbers actually are in plants often, and they show up for a reason, but not every spiral gets to just go unfiltered back into evidence of golden ratio majesty, and not every rectangle is actually a golden ratio. And so this kind of, you need not just bringing it back, but then you have to set up your filters for, is this actually, this thing I've seen, is this actually something that fits in my theory? Do I add it to my theory? So this is how conspiracy theories can get made. And why, I mean, if you're great at self-consistent systems and just understanding this bubble here without both this and that, you can so easily get self-consistent theories where you're not looking skeptically at things, or you're not seeing what you need to look skeptically about. For example, if you're looking at, well, the golden ratio is a pretty good example. But there's many conspiracy theories where it's just lacking that unfiltered part. But you can lack the top part too, which is why I want to talk about all parts of this loop. Okay, what am I talking about now? Let's look at my augmentation box. So when I make a video about a doodling game, the thing that is the system and the game is in here, my game world, the rules. First, draw a triangle. Then, draw a smaller triangle from the midpoints to make a smaller triangle. Okay, then in each of these 4 triangles, draw the triangle. That's a very step-by-step, those are the rules for doing the thing. Now it's a game you can play by yourself in your notebook. And that's one part of it. But I try and also teach the system around my design of the game, the thought process, just like with real self-consistent mathematical systems, which has to do with, okay, so you're doodling, you're maybe having random rules, and your doodling has this result over here. It's like real-time client-side graphics rendering, and you have this noticing, like how do you notice things about this actually what you're drawing? And then how do you bring it back in a way that makes sense with your rules? And by kind of creating the game, by teaching this kind of noticing what's there and then refining it, we end up with the ultimate doodle game, which is now much more beautiful than it was before. Because it's a shame when the player only gets to play the game without necessarily understanding it so deeply, except for in expert play, where the expert players start to see into those systems that make it so beautiful. And this is a problem with education, because people focus on this, the model, without any of how to see it or how to make sure something really belongs in it. And yeah, you have to teach the whole bit. And then this filter can have many tools. A common tool right now is like, you're right, you can use mathematics, you can use a scientific method, but for a lot of this feedback loop, the filters that go into this arrow end up being things like social approval, or it feels good, just it's what's in the air. There are many reasons people decide to either let this thing through or not, and I love that we are inventing more and more tools we can put in this filter arrow to help us figure out what's real about this and what's not. But filters aren't enough. No amount of logic, mathematical tools, scientific method, no amount of perfect filtering is going to get you an actual model of the real world if you haven't noticed the things. And the question is, how do you get that noticing bit? How do you see something that's not even in your model of the world? And here is where I would like to have Feminist Minute. I have decided that all my talks now should have Feminist Minute because you have to make time and space for it in you know, just life, right? Or, you know, it's not going to get put there for you. So I've worked in math and computer science and now technology and virtual reality and games. I've been in a lot of male-dominated fields, and that means that I can tell you so many people just have trouble doing the seeing part of seeing women as being as good as they are. And this goes for many other groups too. They just can't see them in the first place as being potential people who could come back to their, you know, great at thing that they're worried about right now. And they might know their filters are really good. They're like, but I'm so logical, I have good judgment, like everything is here that I'm sure if I saw an actual good female game designer, you know, I would know it if I saw it, right? And the thing is, they can't see it. Like, even if it's right in front of you, unless you know how to notice, you won't even see. It doesn't matter how logical you are. It doesn't matter how good you are at judgment if you can't, in the first place, not judge. And so this is why the assumption needs to be that you just trust women to be as good as they are. Like, in a room like this, like, obviously anyone here kind of knows what they're doing, right? This isn't a random sample of the population that you should suddenly apply some randomness filter on, but you just trust women to be as good as they actually are. And then, you know, before you take huge action on that, then maybe you want to look at your filters before you give them $1 million grant to do whatever. But if your initial assumption isn't that they're probably good, you won't even be able to see them to apply all your logic. That is Feminism Minute. Yay, people are people. So we're working on that. Seeing each other. Okay, so here's actually where my talk has lots of cross matrices, because this is a tool I also use when I'm thinking about everything. It's a great, you gotta fill out all the boxes and then you get to logic yourself. So one thing I think about is noticing artificial things versus real things, like the mathematical patterns or social patterns, the behaviors of physical objects, and, you know, optical phenomena. All these things are things you can simulate in a game world that simulate something that's in real life, but also are something that's in real life at the same time. Like, they don't just simulate it, rather than just like the drawing of a tree that isn't a tree, but the drawing of a square maybe is a square. Well, sometimes. But, you know, you have these systems that actually are what they are. In your self-consistent worlds and in your game mechanics sometimes, so that's fun. And then there's real patterns, and then there's random patterns. And some patterns actually are a thing, and some are just our human mind ability to make sense out of nonsense. And we can start to try and combinatorialize these things across each other, and like think about, all right, what are games where you make up this self-consistent pattern. And I'm going to go back to the witness again on this, right? You make up this self-consistent world, or in any element of design where, you know, maybe you have lots of blocky shapes, or your aesthetic. And it's not like a fundamentally true thing about the world. Or, for example, Miyagakure is a four-dimensional game, and four dimensions is actually a real thing. So, like, it's a real mathematical concept, and we can think about that. But it's representing something real. So those are kind of the two different sides, is the gameplay mechanics that have a self-consistent world that does or does not relate to a real pattern or a designed pattern. Then is it really trying to make you notice it? Because the game is about notice this thing. It requires you to notice and understand that the rules cause consequences, and that's what creates the puzzle gameplay, for example, or you have these systems interacting in an interesting way. Is it designed to encourage you to notice? Or then there's things that aren't games where you have to just, it's in your life that you notice. You have to be self-driven to notice. No one's like trying to make you notice. So the opposite of the designed game thinking is like research and independent thinking and inquiry. And you can apply these things to real concepts. Like Miyagakure is going to make you better at 4 dimensions in the context of the game world, but maybe it'll also make you better at thinking in 4 dimensions in the real world where this is the same concept. And so you can bring that out to the real world and do stuff with it, and then apply it back again. Whereas other things, you can't do that. And then there's other things that you can maybe think about in the real world and then bring. But when you get the loop, it's really nice. So at the moment, I'm thinking about how do you get that loop where the game makes you notice things in the world, and then that makes you better at the game. And for game design, that's like what we do. We're having the best game ever because we get to do that when we make a game, because we can say, oh, I have this puzzle maybe, and it's mathy, but I don't understand it, but then I can go to the real world and understand more math. Oh, and that makes me think I should put this in my game, and I can do it. And then this is like the addictive loop of game design, especially for puzzle design as a mathematician. It's like, oh, you can do these things, isn't it so beautiful? And then you can loop it, whereas for other kinds of games, it's more representative. You know, I have this forest I'm making, a procedurally generated forest, and I have so many kinds of trees. Oh, now I'm looking at trees differently. Oh, I need one of those. They're real cool. Okay, I will make that in my game. And this is such a fun feedback loop for the artist who gets to, you know, how do I procedurally generate the spirally one? How do I procedurally generate the tall, pointy one? Because you get to have the loop of excitement, but the player doesn't get to have that so much, because for the player, they see the trees in the real world, they can't bring it back. So that's the thing. Now I'm seeing how much time I have.
Whenever you're ready,
a couple minutes. Okay, so I'm just going to go to like a real world example, going down on my slides, and then maybe I'll plug them in again. Okay, where do I click? This. Yep. And now be live. Yay, you're alive. And then I figure out how to go into presenter mode. Okay, so since we're talking about four-dimensional stuff, I have been doing four-dimensional recreational stuff for a long time. In recreational mathematics, there's many enjoyable puzzles one can do using four-dimensional thinking. So this is always on my mind, which is why it's fun to talk to Mark about Miyagakure. And he was asking this question about graphics programming for 4D graphics. And since I know so much stuff in the real world, I started working with a co-author, Henry Segerman, on making a four-dimensional sculpture of this symmetry group that was all stuck in my head because the game had made me think what would be a good symmetry group in order to do this efficiently. And so that was in my head. And I thought, oh, this is such a great, beautiful thing. I want to make it for real. How do I do that? I find Henry, who is a mathematical artist. And so we wrote a paper about the symmetry group, which was fun. And after we did symmetries, these are some figures, and this was the sculpture we made about four-dimensional projections. So now we have this four-dimensional sculpture that was 3D printed. Okay, we forget about this for a while, but then I start working in virtual reality. And at first I'm doing video because, yeah, a few years ago that was what I was doing, and I thought, oh, VR video, let's try that first. I do video, how hard could it be? So I'm like, oh, Henry, now that we have VR video, you could make a GIF of this thing actually rotating in 4D. So he sent me that, and I'm like, okay, now I'm working in VR, I have my monkey sculpture that can actually do its proper rotation. So in 4 dimensions, it wouldn't warp or anything, all the monkeys would be perfectly nice, and it would just be rotating, and this is a projection. Anyway, the point is how we loop it back. Okay, so now we're in VR, we have our monkeys and our 4D stuff, this is cool. Meanwhile, in our video work, we're working a lot with just like rotational orientation for how to look around your video, not spatial tracking, because first of all, none of the headsets had spatial tracking at the time, or at least none of the ones you could get your hands on, even as a developer. And second of all, we were doing video. And so we had to work with quaternions to get the thing from the phone, so you do the thing. So we're thinking about quaternions, which also happens to be the symmetry group of the sculpture that I was so obsessed with, that symmetry group, that I had to make the thing. So that looped around. Until then, we did start working with rendering stuff that wasn't video. And so we said, oh no, how do we put this in actual VR? So you turn your head and you can see this thing, and what space do we put you in? So then the monkeys ended up not in video, but in actual VR. This is at monkeys.hypernom.com. If you have a device, you can monkeys.hypernom.com. Right now, I won't be offended on your phone. So these are some of the shots of different symmetry groups of monkeys in VR. Okay, so now we have all these symmetry groups and we're in VR. We did some 3D printings of those to bring it back to the real world of art. And we did an exhibition. Here we have a headset where you can see the different monkey sculptures, and the way you switch between the four-dimensional symmetry groups is by grabbing the representational block, add like a physical component to switch between the things. Those are our controllers. And then, since as long as we have all these symmetry groups and we have the ability to render stuff, we might as well just do the platonic solids in 4 dimensions. I mean, you have to do, because I had been thinking about, like, it's the fun math puzzles I've been doing since a kid, and since reading Martin Gardner columns, you gotta do it. And everybody agreed this was a great idea. But now, how do we project this into the space you're in? All you have is orientation, and you need to be able to like see where you are rather than just have your face completely within all the objects being projected into it because of the so what we decided to do was, like, first of all, it's going to be kind of a Pac-Man style game mechanic, because that way, as you go through the cells, you eat them and they're gone. You don't have to worry about collision if the mechanic is that you destroy. And for so much of VR, you worry about what happens if the player shoves their head into things. Well, we fixed that problem. We don't stick our head through the things and have it clip through your face or any of that. We just destroy it. It's the game mechanic. That's what you're supposed to do. It's problem solved. And also, the way to move yourself through space, because it just so happens we're thinking about quaternions and the quaternion symmetry group, and plus we need the quaternions, that's the output from the headset. Great, put the two together, and now you can make your location in this four-dimensional space be dependent on what is the quaternion that comes out of the headset. So we end up with this system where, in order to move around the space and eat all the things that, of course, are edible because of the collision mechanic, you have to orient your head in all the possible orientations in three-dimensional rotation space. And that is how HyperNom got made. That is my story. It came around a bunch of times, and it'll keep coming around as we connect more and more things. Okay. Yeah, we'll end there.
All right. Okay, so we have time for a few questions. I think you've got a mic just behind there, behind the screen, which you can grab. Yes. And you can take a seat with me down here. So I will ask the first question because I have the microphone. So you touched on the work of Sol LeWitt, right? And I know you've done this like Sol LeWitt VR project. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about, so one of the things about Sol LeWitt and a lot of the conceptual artists working around that time was that they were sort of using math to like distance themselves from their work, right? Like there's these ideas of like, oh, like the math is like the work, right? And it's like not my personal expression. One of the things I love about your work is like you are expressive through math, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how can we be more expressive with math?
Yeah, I think it's a great myth that, oh, if we just be real rigorous, then I cannot feel anything. Like, it's a way to escape the loop you might be stuck in, but that doesn't mean there's no feeling possible in it. And I think some people who are maybe stuck in one way of thinking who seek to escape from that can find either great joy or maybe nothingness, but just something else in just rigorously changing your way of thinking. But it is possible to make that way of thinking be a joyful one, and that's what I choose to do. Yeah. But, you know, whatever works for people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's open up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yep.
So given you've got symmetry there of hypermonkeys, given the fact you've got Noether's theorem to turn that into a conservation law, do you have like a conservation law of hypermonkeys that you could get going in some way?
The question was, is there a conservation law in hypermonkeys? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, conservation law. I would have to think about that one. I would guess that if you're thinking about conservation laws a lot, then you're already at the point of like, oh, I can notice that and bring it back. Like, I don't know with those particular laws if I'm at the noticing stage where like that's on my mind enough to instinctively immediately be able to see how it would work. But maybe it could, and maybe you should do it.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I've experienced that loop in some of the things that I've made where I'm working on it causes me to notice things and noticing things causes me to bring it back into the game. But that's because I'm a designer. do you have thoughts on how, as a designer, you could build something that for someone who is not or is not yet a designer, they might be able to close that loop and bring it back and play with it?
Yeah, do you have a particular part of the loop you're concerned about? Is it that it's the bringing it back?
How do you design something that someone who doesn't know that system can bring it back because they don't have access to the system you've made?
Yeah, I think especially in art and design, there is a big resistance to copying or to bringing anything back in a way that doesn't come back to like something that's already great. And sometimes you just have to practice, and this can be a practice part where I encourage people to like just copy some art, just copy some design with only a slight twist, and don't be ashamed of it or think it's not good enough if it doesn't immediately lead to this part. And like that's okay, and that's how you learn to do that part better. That's my take.
Yes.
Your answer to the first question, you briefly mentioned rigorously changing your the way you learn. How can you expand on that? Like, how do you keep rigorously changing the way you like think about things?
It's difficult because the more practice you get, the easier it gets. And this is why in the kind of the thing that great educators do, or that Martin Gardner did for me and I try to do for other people, is really try and show that process. So I think one has to seek out materials, and when you're looking at materials to help yourself learn, ask yourself, does this book I think I'm about to read that will help me, or that claims it can help me, or does this tutorial that says it can help me, like, does it have the part where it's doing all of this, or is it just the step-by-step guide that feels good at the moment and has the big red arrows that point you towards the thing without your learning to notice the thing itself? But I don't know if I have spectacular advice on that.
Let's have one more question. Yep.
Where are you right now in the loop in terms of like, so there's a lot of like space in VR that you can move around and rotate it, but how in locomotion, where are you in that loop where you're trying to like take that and have it analogous in VR? Like, do you have any, because that's like really hard to.
Yeah. In my group, we think a lot about physicality and the way that room scale VR that allows us to move around can change the way we think and interact. Like, I think in fundamental ways, it can change how we see information. And so we're only just starting to really think about how you move around. I mean, we've done some stuff where like, oh, maybe a good way to travel around this hyperbolic space would be to map your physical space to this other mapping, and mapping different spaces to spaces. Something simple is like, what if my movement has a larger effect in my virtual world than my physical world, and it seems like I travel vast distances with a single step, or the further away my hand gets from me, the longer it reaches, so I can interact with close objects just fine here, but I want that thing across the room. Well, reaching my arm gets it, because my arm gets longer and longer just by virtue of distance. So when we think of mapping spaces to other spaces, we start to find ways that interact with our bodies, I think, in a more natural way than the turning your head to move in space, because that wasn't natural. It was fun only because you didn't particularly care where you were. So that made it less frustrating, all the world symmetric. But once we were in that mode of mapping spaces, yeah, we started to see all these things. What if when you're standing up, you tower above a tiny world, but when you sit down, now we're mapping height to the scale of the world. Tons of ways to map space. I'd love to explore more of it.
I'm just going to squeeze in one more question. So you talked a lot about, obviously, noticing things and how we're also good at misnoticing things, right? Because our brains look for patterns, and we sometimes think that we found a pattern, which... so how do we know when we have found a pattern in the noise that it's actually the complete thing and not some smaller subset of like a larger pattern that we're just completely missing, right? I feel like a lot of discourse maybe over the last week has been about trying to identify patterns.
Good question. I, for myself, have found that often my weaknesses were in the noticing part, and that's why I try and really listen to what people have actually noticed around them. And I found the more I listen to people's actual realities and experiences, like for themselves, not hypothetical other people, not like, well, a friend of a friend said this, the more I'm like, okay, so this is a thing I have to notice because I know it's real, and I can't automatically dismiss it. So now that I've noticed it, I have to judge it and filter it in a very different way than I do when I think it's hypothetical. And I think people often, in political discourse, it's all hypotheticals and very little about what actually impacts people's lives personally. So I always try and listen to personal stories and believe them.
Thank you so much, Vi Hart. Round of applause.